Hey everybody, Dr. Nelson. It's Sunday night, October 1st. So I'm working on midterm grades because I have to turn them in the morning. And anyway, so I'm looking at your questions for the oral history project, which you turned in, I guess yesterday they were due. So I'm not going to be able to get through all of them before tomorrow morning. Uh, I'm trying to make comments on them. I'm through about 6 or 7. And I just realized just because of the grades, I just realized what I'm going to instead do is I'm just going to make some general comments that apply to everybody. And then I'm going to glance at all of them, make sure you actually did it. And if I need to maybe make a few more comments specifically to a particular person, I will. But this is kind of meant for everybody. So hopefully you'll watch this. I do see the number. I can't tell who watched what, but I can see the numbers of how many watched. And it's usually about half the class watch these videos. So hopefully that'll change. So real quick, you guys again submitted questions, potential questions for your oral history interviews. And I know this is tricky. In fact, a lot of you are still in high school. This is your first college class, so and this is probably something you've never done before. So again, I do know it's a little bit tricky. This may be the first time you've ever even interviewed anybody for whatever reason. Some of this I went over in the longer video. Again, I'm not sure how many have watched that. That tells you kind of how to do the whole process. But let me give you a couple of quick pointers because I am kind of seeing the same things over and over. And some of these are really good. And again, like I said, I know it is tricky, but again, you are taking the time to interview somebody. You're taking their time. And this may be the only time you interview this person. I know a lot of you people, listen to me, a lot of you people, a lot of you guys are interviewing family members, and this may be the only time you do this. So you do want to make sure you get it right. In addition to getting good history just for yourself. So a couple of just kind of broad things to think about. Number one, really think about what it is you're interviewing them for. What is your focus? A lot of these, you're kind of all over the place. You're like, what's it? You're asking about their childhood, and you're asking about being old, and you're asking them for advice. And that's, you do want to make sure you give them some context. In other words, no matter what you're interviewing them for, you do want to, at least to begin with, get them to tell them about, get them to tell you about themselves. Usually before I turn the recorder on, I talk a little bit to the person, like, okay, I'm going to ask you questions about these. So they already kind of know. And I definitely always give them the first question before I turn it on so they can be thinking about their answer. And usually the first question is, just tell me a little bit about yourself, where you were born, where you're from. Just kind of like, just let them talk. And half the time they're going to talk for 30 minutes. Well, I was born in Decatur County, and I was, don't ask them a million questions that you already know the answer to. I see a lot of people are going, where were you born? Where did you go to school? How many brothers? Hopefully most of that you already know, but there are ways to ask those types of questions without just going down a checklist. What's your name? How old are you? That doesn't really, you're kind of wasting time. So you can say, so I see you were, I know you were born in 1950 in Decatur County, Georgia. Now tell me a little bit about your earliest memory. You've provided the info. You're not wasting time going, where were you born? What year were you born? Again, you can supply that info in the question, or you can ask kind of, again, a broad question to cover all of that. Tell me about growing up. But again, think about what it is you're asking them for. You only have them for 30 minutes to an hour. Are you, because a lot of you are focusing on 9/11, although my only downside of that is there's not really that much to talk about. It's one day, unless they were in New York or Washington, they're probably just going to say, I was watching CNN, you know, so, but again, if 9/11 is your focus, then focus on 9/11, get them to give you a little bit of background, say, tell me about that day. And I guarantee you, though, if that's what you're asking, they will remember that day. Now, again, if you're just, now some people may just be throwing that in there as just kind of a bonus question, which is totally fine, but do that at the end. But whatever it is are you asking them about their career, about growing up, about their education? Focus on one of those areas and then really get them to talk about that period. Open-ended questions is what you want. You don't want yes, no questions. You want tell me about this, describe for me X, Y, or Z. Describe for me what life is like as a farmer. And again, try to go chronological. Tell me about why did you become a farmer? And some of you, I see some of you ask questions like that. How did you, tell me what a typical day is like when you're farming. What's the hardest thing as a farmer? What's your favorite thing as a farmer? Try to avoid putting words in their mouth. I see a few people, and I'm sorry to pick on anybody if this is your question, but things like, did you feel special when you did this? See, now you're putting words in their mouth. You're getting them to answer a specific, you want them to say, oh, I felt, or tell me about hardships. Well, maybe they don't have hardships. Don't assume anything. Just get them to tell you something. And then if it is a hardship or something, then you can pursue that. But don't lead them on, Tell me, were you homesick? Were you mad about, kind of let them provide that. Don't put the words in their mouth. Let's see. Try to be chronological, because that's kind of how we think. Because I see, and again, you may have just been throwing in the questions, but I really wanted these to kind of be, to some degree, the questions you're going to ask sort of, kind of in the order. So it's already kind of like your script in a way. So, I see a lot of you are like starting with like their job, and then down at the bottom, you're asking about growing up. It's like, really think about chronologically, get them to tell you about their background, and then build up to what you're working on, whatever that might be. And then at the end, maybe ask them, like say 9/11, if that's not your focus, maybe at the end, you can ask them a couple of quick questions. I'm always fascinated by holidays, just as a historian. I've done quite a bit of work on Halloween. That would be an interesting question just to end with. If you now, you may have plenty of stuff already, but tell me about celebrating Halloween or Christmas, or sometimes that I'm most asking that because I'm nosy about that, since that is research I do. But again, really consider what it is you are trying to figure out. Now, I know really the answer is I have to do this assignment because Dr. Nelson is making me do it, but really think about what it is that you are trying to get. But remember, focus on them. Because again, I like a couple people asked about 9/11 and said, "Why do you think it happened?" They can't really answer that. They weren't the bombers. They weren't the planners. They have no idea. They only know what you and I know, which is what they see on TV. But you can ask them how it made them feel. What did they do that day? Again, whoever you're interviewing, it needs to be focused on them. So only ask them stuff that they would know from first person experience, not from what they read in a book. Again, I don't think anybody's done this, but I've had people ask questions like, why was Richard Nixon president? What was Richard Nixon like? Like, they don't know, so again, focus on what they would know, not what they would, again, what we can read in a textbook. I do have two people, and I'm not going to call them out by name or anything, but I've had two people already, and I haven't gone through all of them yet, that clearly are like asking questions about people that don't, like, from history. So make sure you are actually asking, that you do have a real person you're going to be asking questions of. I've never seen that before, but I have two different people that are clearly interviewing historical figures that are no longer alive. Two more quick things. One is, I think three people already used the word slavery. There is no one alive today who was around when slavery existed. So do not be asking people about slavery. That has been gone since 1865, and we are in 2023, close to 200 years now. So do not ask about slavery. But I have, some people are asking questions about segregation and racism. In some cases, asking people who are African-American. Well, actually, I shouldn't even specify because it's sensitive. I was going to say it's a sensitive topic. I think it's sensitive for everybody, but in particular, I think for people who are African-American going through that, it's not something people always want to talk about. So first off, before you even turn the recording on, make sure that person is okay having these conversations. A lot of people are, but just make sure they're okay having these conversations, and make sure you address that sensitively, and again, make sure it's focused on the person themselves. What was your experience like? What did you see? And again, that does get sensitive, so make sure you're not, saying, if you're talking to somebody who maybe is white and 90 years old, you're not going, were you racist? Obviously, I don't think anybody would do that, but, do be very careful with things like race and discrimination. I mean, they're just sensitive topics, and people can get very emotional talking about them, or just feel a little bit like they're being attacked a little bit, And, if you are going to, whatever you interview the person about, again, I stress over and over, make sure that you've done a little bit of research. So you do know a little bit about the time period you're asking about, because there's nothing worse than somebody, being interviewed and then they suddenly realize the person interviewing them has no idea what they're talking about. Now, I bet the people you're interviewing, they understand you're in high school, most of you, and that you're young and you're doing this because you have to do it, but still try to make a little bit of an effort to, show that you are interested. And by doing that, a good way to do that is to already know a little something about the person you're interviewing and about the topic. And please watch the video on oral history before you do the interview, because I go through quite a bit of a lot of what I just said, but even more, but even like things to do during the interview. Because you really do want to make sure that, there's a lot of things you want to make sure you're doing. It's, look at the person as much as you can. Don't just stick with the script. I'll give you one quick example. Sometimes people you ask them a question and they kind of hint at something, like they might say, yeah, that was a really hard day. My mom died. And then you just go right to the next question. And instead of going, oh, wow, tell me about that. I didn't realize you were going to, in other words, let their answers guide your next question a little bit. The questions aren't the important part, really. The important part is their story. So your questions are just there for you to pull the story out of them. And sometimes you don't need the question. Sometimes they'll answer your question before you even ask it. And sometimes you'll go off in a slightly new direction. Don't be afraid of that a little bit. But again, focus on the person as much as you can and focus on their life story, not looking for advice. That's the other one, the last one. I have seen several questions what kind of advice can you give me? That's not the purpose of this. You can do that when you turn the recording off. Then you can ask for advice, but not for this. All right. I hope I don't sound too grouchy or anything. But again, basically, these are your first draft. I really think a lot of you, if not most of you, probably do need to kind of rewrite these and really think about how to ask these questions. And again, a lot of it is, what is it you're focusing on? And again, just looking at the questions, I can't always tell. So anyway, I'm rambling now. Okay. So like I said, for most of you, I'm going to go ahead and give you full credit for doing it, but that doesn't mean these are always good questions. And I am going to try to comment on a few of these, but I can't comment on every one of them, at least not the next 12 hours. All right. Let me stop here. I'm in a hurry. So, all right. Might do another one of these in about a week.